Path to Abolish Dictators, the Moral Authority. The purpose of this essay is to abolish dictators and all forms of authoritarianism. A daunting task, for sure, but I believe it is achievable. I have a plan. It is based on the moral authority. The moral authority was initiated by the Quakers to defeat all dictators. They petitioned the English Parliament, and this took 20 years because England was the largest slave trading country in the world, and it took up about a fourth of its total economy. So this was no easy task for England to initiate this, but in 1810, they did abolish slave trading for England. This was done by boarding slave ships from all over the world on the open seas and even in the sovereign waters of countries. They even went up the Amazon River to board a slave trading ship. They would confiscate these ships and free the slaves. Well, this made slave trading less profitable, and over time, it served its purpose. Actually, other nations such as the Netherlands and France, they got in the act too, and they began doing the same thing. So this hastened the demise of slave trading. Now, it took America over a half a century later before we passed a law to abolish slavery. In her book, Strong Men, by Ruth Ben-Ghiat, a history professor at New York University in New York City, and a frequent correspondent in CNN, offers a comprehensive analysis of dictators and their ascent to power. It is essential reading for all members of Congress, which I would advise. We must proactively identify dictators and authoritarian regimes. A passive stance will never yield victory. We must take the initiative. Our strategy should be twofold. First, establish a collective known as the Democratic Nations, as opposed to the United Nations. Second, recover the wealth illicitly amassed by the dictators and ensure its return to its rightful owners, the citizens. This wealth should be safeguarded in a trust overseen by the democratic nations. Qualifications for joining the democratic nations will be free elections with term limits for all government officials, recognition of the sovereignty of the citizens, the basic right to life, which is the basis of all rights, to include the right to property, the right to free speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of religion. Also, trade only with other democratic nations. And finally, provide military support if and when necessary. This will reorient our world and provide a safe haven for all members of the democratic nations. It must be acknowledged that all natural resources, such as oil, mining, and forestry, belong to that country's citizens. The proper function of a government is to protect those properties. They are not owned by the president, monarch, religious leaders, kings, etc., and certainly not by authoritarian dictatorships or other thugs. So we now have the moral authority to return the wealth to their rightful owners. This will take not only a moral authority, but courage and perseverance. These virtues could now come into force by the democratic nations against Venezuela, an oil-rich country with a dictator, Maduro. He thinks that oil belongs to him. No, no, and hell no. That wealth of the natural resources belongs to the Venezuelan citizens. They must revolt and restore the liberty and freedom they deserve. The wealth must be confiscated and put into a trust of the democratic nations. Only returned once they have disposed of Maduro and his collaborators and generals. Maduro depends on that wealth to pay for his military, which protects him, as it does with all dictators. The loss of wealth will weaken his regime and allow for a successful revolution by the citizens of Venezuela. After they have qualified for the democratic nations, they can then become members. These nations of the democratic nations now have a safe home where they have a vote and can depend on their allies to protect them. There are many nations in Asia and the Pacific areas that fear China and perhaps even North Korea. It would be a comfort to the democratic nations in that area to know that the militaries of Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, Australia, and New Zealand, and perhaps eventually other nations such as Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, and India may be called upon to help with their militaries to combat any threat of invasion after they have become members of the democratic nations. The DN will bring nations and people together, Muslims, Christians, and even political parties that are so divisive now. They will be encouraged to unite in a more important goal, to abolish dictators. Now, my challenge: do we have the courage of Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Patrick Henry, Andrew Jackson, our founding fathers? We shall see. Liberty is ours.